Good morning. It's someday in the future, and I am talking to you through this lens, but it might not make any sense because I'm talking weird. I haven't really improved that much. Yes, I have actually. I listened back, and things were way worse than they are now. I think I did that on purpose a bit. Like, I tell people the show has gone from hideous to just terrible. But really, I'm kind of proud of that elephant shot the other day. It was cool. And the tiny homes were cool too. But I can't get it together to do that every day. I'm gonna exercise today, so I'm just talking to the camera, and I'm not gonna edit it till after, because that weirds me out. But what is this? This is Friday's show. Like Thursday, we should be reading. I should have done that. I'll do that later. And then Friday's show is about idealism. I mean, 30% of the world is desert. And like when you travel the world, you notice that where mankind has been for a long time, we create deserts. But I don't know, maybe that could be fixed with the new saltwater desalination techniques. I mean, I found some cool stuff I should show you. I'll show you in a minute. It's well, that one guy is got a few cool shots, and then the Chinese guy, what is his name? You? No, it's not. I don't know his name, but he's been working on it for 20 years. Desertification, and there's in places like where the lush, they call that lush, or somewhere. It's almost Tibet. It's in China. It's the dry desert part, and they cleaned it up pretty nicely. And it wasn't with seawater. It was with just doing the right thing, like you know, promoting the wild plants growth and causing a bit of a canopy to trap water when it rains. I mean, a lot of the problem with that those dry zones is that you put goats on land and they totally dry it out. I mean, it's weird that I'm interested in it because I am living in a really rainy place. It's very, very rainy here. There's tons of cultural stuff too. My wife is always telling me I like mosquito infested, swampy places. And that's not true. It's like I just like places with a bit of greenery to trap some water. Because if you cut down everything and dry it all out, sure you got no mosquitoes, but you also have lots of other problems, including desertification. I don't know. And what else? Well, when I lean back, I can talk better, but it's a worse shot. I should probably sit up. a better shot. And then what happened? Well, I mean, like I Googled what I Googled or YouTubed, I put in some words like greening the deserts, and it came up with a bunch of stuff that I've been looking at with seawater and stuff, but also kind of dudes who managed to do a little, like if you terrace the land correctly and trap water with greenery, you can actually green up the land quite well. But I mean, 30% of our land is desert now. We've got to work on that. But I don't know if that's my story. I mean, I live in rain land. And I keep playing with the buttons. Anyway. Yeah, okay, I set up at least, and I put the laptop on the table in front of me. So that's better. And um, all I really have is that this is blog 88, 89, and that kind of matters because I'm getting towards 100. I mean, the first shows from 2004 and 2009 were basically 100 episodes long. And I think maybe that's a good point for me to stop because I'll change to practicing walking then. Maybe I'll take August off, but I gotta get back into it and do another 100 shows. I mean, Louis done over 1,700 or something. Lots and lots of episodes. I'm starting to respect him the most. I mean, Casey Neistat's a pretty darn interesting guy. And Ben Brown, well, he's a jock. He actually gets out, shoots a lot. But Louis is the guy who actually puts it together, goes to really exotic places, and does interesting stuff. I think he's the soul man too. Like when I was criticizing everybody about, like they had $2 million for Somalia and they weren't doing a good job. Louis went to Somalia and actually talked to the people and looked at the problem. And, I mean, he was talking about the ocean there. Like, they don't have a seafood thing happening. And they're starving. They're on the ocean. Why don't they do a little fishing? That's an interesting one. I've swam in that ocean. It's good, clear Indian Ocean coral and stuff. Or at least it used to be. Don't know, whatever. I mean, bloggers are in a unique place where they can actually make a little bit of a difference. But I like Humpty Dumpty shots.
He's managing director at Seawater Greenhouse and Rooftop Greenhouse, which are both really interesting concepts, taking, I guess, unorthodox resources or things that we wouldn't think of as as resources and using them to grow crops and to heat houses using things that are already there. So he's designed and supervised construction of these seawater greenhouses in Abu Dhabi, Oman, and Australia. So desert areas where we're using seawater instead of fresh water. And I'm sure he can tell you much more about it than I can. Why don't you come on up and let's give him a big, big welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Paul, for setting it up so well. You must forgive the slightly cheesy title, A Climate Recipe, and I'm going to talk about climate change, but the idea that if we can crack climate change and solve it, we also solve every other problem at the same time. There's a bewildering number of problems that we're facing, and what I want to suggest is that if we simply produce more water and use it more wisely, we can solve all of the other problems at the same time. And in fact, it's not so much that we need the water, but we need what the water can do, and what the water does best, which we use it for most.
Well, that's quite an impressive list. Energy, food, water. Environment, poverty, terrorism, disease, education, democracy, population. How is seawater going to solve that? Well, that's the idea.
My name's John Liu. I've just been learning English by listening to the Voice of America on the radio, so perhaps we can have a practice conversation. But that's not really true, because I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, but for the last 37 years, I've lived in China. I am the ecosystem ambassador for Common Land Foundation. I have a visiting fellowship at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology. This was a presentation which I gave at the European Permaculture Convergence. I went to China in 1979. I helped to open the CBS News Bureau. And but what I've been thinking about is evolution. After a long time in the news, I started to think about how the Earth formed, and it was a molten rock surrounded by poisonous gases. And then over prodigious time, it was converted by biological life. And it's interesting because our religious cosmologies, they all say that human beings emerged in paradise. And if I look at evolution and I consider that there's a photoreactive biochemical reaction that converts sunlight and water and nutrients into life, and that this respirates and obviously created an oxygenated atmosphere and a fully functional freshwater system and fertile soils and tremendous biodiversity. It seems to me that in evolutionary terms, human beings emerged in paradise. So I think that's why I don't find a difference between the religious cosmologies and evolution. And I think if we understand that human beings emerged under a canopy, and that canopy was providing us with microclimates, and the height of the canopy, the percentages and total amounts of organic and biomass, and then the percentages and total amounts of accumulating organic matter are really important. And human beings only emerged in relationship to geologic and evolutionary time in the very last few moments. And in this scenario, we began to have some impacts when we learned how to hunt. And we learned how to hunt probably by studying some other species who hunt in packs. And we became very good at this. And one of our first impacts was to take out megafauna. And we started to reduce and change biodiversity. This is cheating. This is just a cheetah nursing in the wild so that you'll like me. And this was the baseline study for the Loess Plateau Watershed Rehabilitation Project. If you've ever heard of me, it's probably because of this work. Unless you're a news freak and you were interested in those things. But the Loess Plateau, when I was asked to go to the Loess Plateau in 1995, I found that this was an example of a cradle of civilization that had been fundamentally ecologically destroyed. And it was very interesting to me because in comparison with the geopolitical events I'd been covering, I found that this was more interesting and more important ultimately. This is Loess. Loess is a geomorphological soil. It's caused by glacial movements in the Himalayas and deposited by wind on the plateau. And because this is the cradle of civilization for the Chinese race, if you dig around in there, you might find some rather interesting things, which you may discover here in just a moment. Dig a little more. Okay. So, this was the place where the early Chinese civilizations began. The Han, the Qin, the Tang dynasties were in this place. This is to the southwest, and it's a fully functional system. And this is what it looked like in 1995 when I went to the Loess Plateau. So how do you do that? How do you take a fully functional system, which is the birthplace of the largest ethnic group on the planet, and turn it into this ruin? I went there and I knew nothing about this. But I looked at this, and in comparison with the geopolitical things, I thought, this is more important. This is what we're left with. Generations in the future are never going to remember Brezhnev or any of this other stuff that's going on. They're going to be left with the decisions, the consciousness that we hold, and the choices that we make in understanding about this. So I started to study this. And it's now been over 20 years that I've been studying this. And it turns out that when you start to study, you gradually learn a little bit more. And so in this place, there was virtually no vegetative cover at all. And if you didn't have a baseline and you looked at it and you said, well, this is a desert. But actually, it's not really a desert. It's an area that has been degraded by human beings. And so it's very similar to the Mediterranean, to North Africa, to the Sahel, to many areas in Central Asia, and growing more and more in Central America and South America. So, and to some extent in North America. So if we understand this, the other part of this is that the people in this area were desperately poor. And China has been changing in recent time, so they were the poorest people. And somehow the government in China said, well, we can't have the rest of the East Coast and the manufacturing areas become wealthy and leave these people in misery out there. So they really wanted to do something to help in the area. And they also had a really enormous problem, because when you have such a situation, it causes enormous disruptions to natural systems. And so you have poverty. That's clearly apparent that the people are desperately poor and they're barely eking out a living, and actually their activities are making the situation worse. But in order to understand this, the Chinese dispatched like a large number of scientists. And the World Bank had hired me to go out and document this. So I learned quite a lot, and I got to hang out with the scientists.
Now, when we came to this place in the Loess Plateau the first time, we were all really shocked. You know, we thought, oh my God, you know, well, how can ever anybody try to rehabilitate an area that is so huge and so fundamentally destroyed ecologically? And the truth is, we spent 2 years working with the local people, with the farmers, with the local officials, with the experts in the various fields of hydrology, solid water conservation, forestry, agriculture, environment, try to understand what it would take to do something like this. And after 2 years, we still didn't have many answers. The World Bank didn't have the answer, and the local people didn't have the answer. And we spent another 1.5 years talking to the farmers in the villages, trying to understand what they had done in the past 20 or 30 years that was successful. And it was really interesting. Not much was there to show, because the current practices at that time were just not sustainable at all.
Well, you know, that is Jürgen Vogele. He designed the intervention for the World Bank, so he's a pretty important fellow. And this is what it looked like. And, you know, there's virtually no vegetation. And hydrologically speaking, what you have is, if the water comes down and hits a canopy, it has a certain dynamic. But if you've removed the vegetation, then it's really the kinetic energy that is so powerful. So you're really losing the water, and you're losing your soils. And, you know, over millennia, human beings have not actually taken this on, that this is the basis of our atmosphere, of our hydrological cycle, of climate regulation, of biodiversity. And when we allow this to degrade, then it leads to just ultimately to this collapse scenario. And we've been going that way repeatedly, and we've been in primitive societies, this would be like slash and burn. But now we're doing the same things as slash and burn, but we're mechanizing it so we can actually destroy faster. And the impacts are enormous. And I think a number of people are talking about this all over the world, that it's really our consciousness that has to increase. Because when we're fully conscious of what's happening, we can make different choices.
还点还叫种树木，种哎，我树啊。跑道的地现在都栽树嘛，北片都跑道的地都现在栽树啊。我看这些，就像我说，我在我死呀嘛，看你们吃身体好，哎，吃着西边粉嘛，看吃啥呀吧。
So from this scenario, the World Bank, the Chinese government, decided they were going to completely change the situation. No one could really believe this. It was like a fantastic idea, but everybody thought it was sort of, you know. Anyway, we made a film called Hope in a Changing Climate that was broadcast at the time of Copenhagen on the BBC. So basically, we started documenting in 1995, and we watched all of the processes. So they had to change their policy because the policy was allowing for unsustainable agricultural practices. All of those were made illegal. So you couldn't do the things which everybody had been doing there. So they had to substitute behaviors. So they had to train everybody in new behaviors. And they used participatory mechanisms to communicate what was going on. And they used another method which was very successful. They paid them. That works very well. And so by paying them to learn and to give them the basis of a new sustainable agricultural systems, they got them all to participate, and ultimately the outcomes and the harvest belong to the people. So this was a fairly enlightened and rather dramatic thing. This is actually a type of water storage mechanism or water capture called terracing, but it's not a terracing project. It's just it's an integrated project. So terraces are part of this. Other types of things, gabions, meanders, check dams, all sorts of water management, but then also propagation and plant out and the substitution of perennials for annuals, and a growing understanding of polycultures as opposed to monocultures. And to some extent, a growing understanding of the relationship between ecological landscapes and productive agricultural landscapes. So there is a lot of complexity. There's quite a lot to study. It's quite interesting to follow the methodologies.
The goal was to give a hat to the hilltops, give a belt to the hills as well as shoes at the base. The hat meant that the top of these hills had to be replanted with trees. The belt meant that terraces had to be built to be used for crop planting and also for trees. The shoes were the dams which we had to build so that the hills could grow back to life and our economy as well as our lives could improve.
When I first filmed Mr. Ta Fuyuan and his colleagues back in 1995, I had no idea this initiative could achieve such dramatic results. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. Well, this is, for me, was extremely important because I started to realize in our economic systems, the ecological systems are zero. It's only the products which we extract which are given value. This is fundamentally wrong. So we have a fundamental error in logic at the basis of global economics. And it's fairly dramatic when you start to understand what this means. So I think a lot of people are talking about paradigm shifts and that we need this. We absolutely must come to grips with this, because what you find out is we have created a perverse incentive to degrade the ecosystems by valuing the derivatives higher than the source of life. And you don't get another result until you figure this out.